There is a perception of modern languages, which is that it is really purely focused on learning language, that is, learning grammar in particular, learning long vocabulary lists, these sorts of things. Whereas, in fact, language degrees at university level have a very prominent cultural element. And what students are training for is to become culturally agile and to be able to move between different linguistic and cultural contexts. And so I think that process of learning languages and acquiring the kind of knowledge of languages in their cultural context is really instrumental to decolonising the curriculum across all disciplines. You know, in all disciplines, we're engaging with our disciplinary area through a particular language. And in the vast majority of cases here in Bristol, that language is English. So just through encouraging students to engage with different languages, we're encouraging to do that cultural work of thinking about something from a different perspective through their choice of language. In terms of decolonising the teaching of modern languages, I think there are kind of two main things. In the kind of mid to longer term, I think the real issue is which languages we teach. And modern languages as a discipline, as it's developed in the UK, has predominantly focused on Western European languages as it grew through the 19th century and the early 20th century. Learning languages was a way of improving cultural cooperation. So you get a big investment in language learning after the First World War, for example, and with the growing importance of a European project. And what that means is that we end up with a set of languages which are global in their scope because of the project of empire and the way in which languages such as French or Spanish were exported. But it means that students don't have access to languages which are very widely spoken here in the UK because they don't fit historically into what modern languages has been. So you get African languages, for example, only being taught really at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. So I think that we could really think more in a much more concerted way about introducing languages, non-European languages, into the curriculum. Here in Bristol, we do teach Arabic, Korean, and Mandarin, but these are not full degree courses. So you take a unit, learning Arabic from scratch, for example, but it's not a full degree course with all of the cultural apparatus and cultural historical units surrounding it. So there have been for a long time, for decades really, there have been initiatives in what are sometimes called community languages or heritage languages. There's a big project up in Manchester, the Multilingual Manchester Project, which is about embedding those languages in the university curriculum. Here in Bristol, we have a very large Somali population. So, imagine a university where we were teaching Somali to students, say, from the medical school. What would that give them in terms of skills when they were then going out and working for the NHS? So I think that that's a really interesting way that we can decolonise modern languages. And I mean, my own teaching is in African literature, in French. So I'm interested in how we can, using these hegemonic European languages and within the confines of a degree in French, we can also pull them apart so we can start to challenge this narrow methodological nationalism which has dominated modern languages departments. So through introducing, say, the teaching of the Haitian Revolution to the first year students, we teach the Haitian Revolution alongside the French Revolution. And we ask students to challenge ideas of freedom or ideals of freedom and equality that are put forward during the period of the French Revolution through the lens of the Haitian Revolution and through the lens of 20th century writers such as Aimé Césaire and C.L.R. James and what they write about the Haitian Revolution. So I often give my students a film in Wolof say, which is the lingua franca of Senegal, even though they're studying a unit in what is supposedly Francophone African literature. I will always put that on the curriculum because it immediately challenges Francophone Africa as itself being a colonial construct. I question the extent to which modern is a useful term to have in the title of a degree or of a school. The modern is such a slippery term to the extent that it comes to be a bit meaningless unless situated very precisely. In language education, modern is often posed in distinction to ancient languages, classical languages, Greek and Latin, and so on. And then in the 17th and 18th century, you get these big disputes around what kind of knowledge should we cling to? Is it the ancient knowledge or is it the modern knowledge? But then, of course, as we know from decolonial thought, modern then comes to operate as part of the European project of colonial modernity. And that's a project which arguably begins in 1492 with the contact across the Atlantic space. So I would advocate foregrounding multilingualism, foregrounding translation within a school of languages and cultures. And that term modern, it's useful to critique it, it's useful for students to think about it historically, how it's been used and how that term itself retains a kind of power and agency. But I'm not sure that it's the most useful term for us to have. I think in terms of our degrees in French, single honours degrees, but we have a lot of joint honours programmes with history, with English, with philosophy, and with other languages within the school. I think it's important that these decolonising approaches are taken aboard across all years of study and by all staff. So to avoid the tokenistic inclusion of one black writer on the first year course, for example. So that's why the Haitian Revolution, we integrate it with the teaching of the French Revolution, and the seminar groups are delivered by all of our colleagues. We also need to then recognise that students choose their pathways through degrees depending on the option units that they choose. So you may have a student who then selects units on Francophone African literature throughout the rest of their degree course, and then does my final year unit on Pan-Africanism. And obviously they're going to come out with a very different education to students who choose 19th century fiction and Renaissance culture. Except I think that joining up these conversations with colleagues who are early modern specialists, 20th century fiction specialists, means that those colleagues are also alert to what it means to take a decolonial approach. And I found actually that my colleagues are really open to re-engaging with their reading lists from that perspective, and that at the moment these conversations have become so widespread that they're kind of full of ideas for how they can push their students to think more critically.